The morning Emmeline Porter watched her brother Thomas walk out of their small cabin with $200 in his trembling hands was the morning she learned exactly how little her own blood valued her life. She stood frozen in the doorway, her worn calico dress fluttering in the September wind that swept down from the Colorado mountains, as the stranger with cold gray eyes took her arm and led her toward a waiting wagon. And Thomas could not even meet her gaze before he disappeared down the dusty road toward the saloons of Manassas. The year was 1883, and Emmeline had just turned 23 years old that summer. She had spent the last 5 years raising Thomas after their parents died of influenza, working her fingers raw, taking in laundry and mending, trying to keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. Thomas had promised her things would get better once he found steady work at the lumber mill, but instead he had found poker tables and whiskey, and now she was paying the price for his weakness. The man who had purchased her was named Dutch Carmody, a saloon owner from Alamosa who ran girls in the back rooms and dealt in human misery the way other men dealt in cattle or grain. He did not speak to her during the long ride north, and Emmeline spent those hours staring at the vast expanse of the San Luis Valley stretching out before them, wondering if she would ever see another sunrise as a free woman. But Dutch Carmody never made it back to Alamosa with his prize. 3 days after he had bought Emmeline from her brother, a cowboy rode into his camp just as the sun was setting over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and everything changed. Samuel Zinc had been tracking Thomas Porter for 2 weeks. He had been playing cards at a table in Del Norte when Thomas stumbled in, drunk and boastful, buying rounds for everyone with money that seemed to burn holes in his pockets. Samuel had watched the young fool brag about how he had finally solved all his problems, how he had paid off his debts to some very dangerous men. And Samuel had felt something cold and hard settle in his chest when he heard how Thomas had come by that money. Samuel knew Emmeline Porter, though she did not know him. He had seen her in Manassas countless times over the past year, had watched her carry heavy baskets of laundry through the streets, had seen the way she held her head high despite the threadbare patches on her skirts and the exhaustion that lined her young face. He had wanted to speak to her, to introduce himself properly, but he was just a ranch hand then, working for wages and trying to save enough to buy his own land, and he had nothing to offer a woman like her except rough hands and uncertain prospects. But when he heard what her brother had done, Samuel had walked away from that poker table, collected his horse, and started hunting. He had money saved now, nearly 3 years' worth of wages carefully hoarded, and he knew exactly how he was going to spend it. Dutch Carmody was a large man, thick through the middle, with a face that showed the evidence of too many bar fights and not enough conscience. He looked up from the fire where he was heating beans when Samuel rode into the small clearing, and his hand moved instinctively toward the pistol at his hip. "That is far enough, friend," Dutch called out, his voice carrying a warning. "This here is a private camp." Samuel dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, his own pistol still holstered at his side. He was tall and lean, 26 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was weathered from years of working outdoors, and there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself that made Dutch reassess his initial dismissal. "I am not looking for trouble," Samuel said, his voice calm and steady. "I am looking to make a business transaction." "I do not do business with strangers in the middle of nowhere," Dutch replied, but his hand moved away from his gun. "State your name and your purpose, or ride on." "My name is Samuel Zinc, and I am here about the woman you bought in Manassas 3 days ago. I want to buy her from you." Emmeline, who had been sitting on the far side of the wagon, hidden in the shadows, felt her heart leap into her throat. She had been preparing herself for the worst, had been trying to find the courage to run when the opportunity presented itself, even knowing she might not survive alone in this wilderness. Now she moved closer to the firelight, trying to see the face of this man who spoke of buying her as if she were a piece of property, expecting to see just another version of Dutch Carmody. Instead, she saw something different in Samuel Zinc's face. She saw anger there, yes, but also a kind of fierce protectiveness that made her breath catch. She saw the way his eyes found hers across the fire, and the way they softened for just a moment before returning to Dutch with renewed hardness. "She is not for sale," Dutch said, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "I paid good money for her, and I have plans." "I will give you $300, Samuel said flatly. "That is 100 more than you paid, and you have not even reached a Lamosa yet. Take the profit and walk away." Dutch laughed, a rough sound that held no humor. "You think I am stupid, Cowboy. She is worth 10 times that in the right market. Young, pretty, strong enough to work. I could sell her to a dozen different buyers before the month is out, or I could keep her and make that much back in half a year." 400, Samuel countered, and Emmeline saw his jaw tighten. "That is everything I have and more than a reasonable man would ask." "Then I guess I am not a reasonable man," Dutch said, and his hand moved back toward his gun. "Now I am going to have to ask you to leave before this gets unpleasant." What happened next occurred so quickly that Emmeline barely had time to draw breath. Samuel's hand dropped to his pistol, but instead of drawing it, he pulled out a thick envelope and threw it into the dirt at Dutch's feet. The sudden movement made Dutch flinch and draw his own weapon, but Samuel's hands were already up, empty and unthreatening. $600, Samuel said, his voice tight with the effort of controlling his anger. "Everything I have saved for the last 3 years, plus money I borrowed against my wages for the next 6 months. Take it and let her go, or I will go back to Manasseh and tell the sheriff exactly what kind of business you are running, and I will bring every decent man I can find to make sure you never do this to another woman again." Dutch stared at him for a long moment, his pistol still drawn, his face red with fury. But Samuel did not back down, did not look away, and finally Dutch holstered his weapon and bent to pick up the envelope. He opened it, counted the bills inside with quick, greedy fingers, and then spat into the fire. "She is all yours, Cowboy," he said, shoving the money into his coat. "And good luck with her. That brother of hers said she has got a tongue sharp enough to cut leather and a stubborn streak a mile wide. You are probably getting the worst end of this bargain." "I will take my chances," Samuel said quietly, and he finally turned his full attention to Emmeline. "Miss Porter, would you gather your things? We are leaving." Emmeline found that she could not move, could not speak. She stared at this stranger, who had just paid a small fortune for her freedom, trying to understand what was happening, trying to make sense of the way her heart was pounding against her ribs. She had never seen such fierce determination in a man's eyes, had never imagined that anyone would do something like this for her. "I do not have any things," she finally managed to whisper. "Just the dress I am wearing." Samuel's expression darkened, and he looked back at Dutch with barely concealed disgust. Then he walked past the fire and offered Emmeline his hand. She took it, feeling the rough calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they closed gently around hers. He helped her stand and led her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes and a patient temperament. "Can you ride?" Samuel asked, and Emmeline nodded. She had learned as a child, though it had been years since she had been on a horse. Samuel mounted first, then reached down and pulled her up behind him with easy strength. Emmeline had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and clean sweat. They rode away from that camp without looking back, and Dutch Carmody watched them go with a satisfied grin on his face. He had just made a profit of $400 on a 3-day investment, and he had done it without firing a single shot. It was, he reflected, one of his better business deals. But Emmeline was not thinking about Dutch Carmody or about profit margins. She was thinking about the man whose waist she was clinging to, this stranger who had given up everything he had to buy her back from a fate worse than death. The questions tumbled through her mind faster than she could sort them, but she did not speak them aloud. Not yet. For now, she simply held on and let herself feel the first fragile stirrings of hope she had felt in 3 days. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from a creek that ran cold and clear down from the mountains. Samuel gave Emmeline his canteen first, waited until she had drunk her fill before taking any for himself. He offered her jerky from his saddlebag, and when she tried to refuse, worried about taking his provisions, he simply placed it in her hand and closed her fingers around it. "You need to eat," he said gently. "It is a long ride back to Manasseh, and you look like you have not had a decent meal in days." Emmeline ate, because he was right, and because the concern in his voice made something in her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. When they mounted again, she found it easier to lean against him, to let herself rest against the solid strength of his back. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Samuel finally spoke the words that had been building in him since they left Dutch's camp. "I am sorry I did not find you sooner," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I came as fast as I could, but I had to gather the money first, had to find out where he was taking you. If I had been even 1 day later—" "But you were not," Emmeline interrupted, her voice soft but steady. She loosened her grip on his waist just enough to see his face in profile, to study the hard line of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders. "You found me, and you saved me, and I do not even know why." Samuel was quiet for so long that Emmeline thought he might not answer. The horse plodded steadily beneath them, following a trail that only Samuel seemed to see, winding through stands of aspen and pine that glowed golden in the early morning light. "I have seen you in Manasseh," he finally said. "For more than a year now, I have watched you working, struggling to take care of your brother, trying to make a life out of nothing. I wanted to speak to you, wanted to introduce myself, but I had nothing to offer you except hard work and rough hands. I was saving to buy land, to build something worth having, so that when I finally did speak to you, I could do it as a man with prospects instead of just another cowboy drifting through." He paused, and Emmeline felt her breath catch at the raw honesty in his words. "When I heard what your brother did," Samuel continued, his voice hardening, "when I heard him bragging about selling his own sister to cover his gambling debts, something in me just snapped. I knew I had to find you, had to get you back, no matter what it cost. So I took every dollar I had saved, and I borrowed more, and I tracked that bastard until I found out who he had sold you to. And then I tracked Carmody until I found his camp." "You gave up everything," Emmeline said, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes. 3 years of savings, 6 months of wages. You gave up your land, your future, for someone you have never even spoken to." "I can always save more money," Samuel said simply. "I can always buy land later, but I could not live with myself if I had not tried to save you. And for what it is worth, Miss Porter, I am not expecting anything from you. Once we get back to Manasseh, you are free to do whatever you want. I just wanted you to have that choice again." The tears spilled over then, running hot down Emmeline's cheeks, and she pressed her face against Samuel's back and cried. She cried for the betrayal of her brother, for the terror of the last 3 days, for the unexpected kindness of this stranger, who had sacrificed everything without asking for anything in return. And she cried because somewhere in the middle of this nightmare, she had found something she had never expected to find. A man worth believing in. They reached Manassas by mid-morning, riding down the dusty main street past the general store and the church and the saloon where Thomas Porter had gambled away his honor. Samuel took Emmeline directly to the boarding house run by Mrs. Sarah Whitmore, a stern widow with a soft heart who took one look at Emmeline's tear-stained face and immediately ushered her inside. "She needs a room," Samuel said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the few remaining coins he had left. "And meals for at least a week. This should cover it." Mrs. Whitmore waved away his money. "I have heard what happened," she said, her voice thick with disapproval. "That worthless brother of hers should be horsewhipped. You keep your coins, Mr. Zinc. This girl is welcome here for as long as she needs, and it will not cost her a penny." Samuel nodded his thanks, then turned to Emmeline. In the bright light of day, she could see him more clearly now. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and eyes that held both kindness and steel. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself that had nothing to do with money or status. "If you need anything," he said, "anything at all, I am working at the Double Z Ranch about 5 miles west of town. You can send word with anyone and I will come." "Wait," Emmeline said, reaching out to catch his sleeve before he could leave. "I do not even know how to thank you. You gave up everything for me, and I have nothing to give you in return." Samuel smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face and made Emmeline's heart skip in her chest. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "Just promise me you will take care of yourself and that you will not let what happened define the rest of your life. You deserve better than that." He tipped his hat to Mrs. Whitmore, nodded once more to Emmeline, and then he was gone, walking back down the street toward the livery where he had left his horse. Emmeline watched him go, feeling the strange weight of everything that had happened settling over her like a heavy blanket. "That is a good man," Mrs. Whitmore said, coming to stand beside her at the window. "One of the best I have known in my 63 years. You could do worse than to set your cap for him, dear." "He does not want anything from me," Emmeline said softly. "He made that very clear." "Oh, that is not what he said at all," Mrs. Whitmore replied with a knowing smile. "He said you do not owe him anything. That is very different from not wanting anything. That man has been sweet on you for over a year, according to the gossip I hear. He just has too much honor to press his suit when you are vulnerable. Give him time, dear, and give yourself time. Good things are worth waiting for." The days that followed were strange and difficult for Emmeline. She had to face the reality of what her brother had done, had to accept that the boy she had raised and protected had valued his own skin more than her life. Thomas had disappeared after selling her, had taken his money and fled town before anyone could confront him about his actions. Part of Emmeline was relieved that she did not have to see him, did not have to look into his eyes and see whatever justification he had constructed for his betrayal. But another part of her grieved for the loss of the only family she had left, even if that family had proven to be worthless. She found work again, taking in laundry and mending just as she had before, but now she worked for herself instead of for Thomas's debts. Mrs. Whitmore refused to charge her for room and board, insisting that Emmeline save her money for her future. And several of the other women in town made a point of bringing her extra work and paying her generously. It seemed that everyone had heard about what happened, and the general consensus was that Thomas Porter was a coward and a scoundrel, and that Emmeline deserved all the help and support the community could provide. But the person she most wanted to see, the one whose face haunted her dreams and whose kindness had changed everything, did not come to town. Samuel Zinc stayed at the Double Z Ranch, working from dawn until dusk, and Emmeline heard through the gossip network that he had taken on extra jobs to pay back the money he had borrowed. He was breaking horses for other ranchers, helping with roundups, taking on any work that would bring in additional wages. He was rebuilding everything he had spent to save her, and he was doing it without complaint and without seeking any recognition. 3 weeks after Samuel had brought her back to Manassas, Emmeline made a decision. She borrowed Mrs. Whitmore's horse and buggy, packed a basket with fresh bread and cold chicken and apple pie, and drove out to the Double Z Ranch. Her heart was pounding the entire way, and she rehearsed a dozen different speeches in her head, trying to find the right words to say everything she was feeling. The ranch was a sprawling operation, with a large main house and several outbuildings scattered across a valley that was already turning gold and red with the colors of autumn. Emmeline found Samuel in the corral, working with a young stallion that was fighting the saddle with all the fire and fury of wild youth. She stood at the fence and watched him work, mesmerized by the patience and skill he showed, the way he never raised his voice or his hand in anger, even when the horse kicked out or tried to throw him. It took Samuel 20 minutes to notice her standing there, and when he did, he nearly got himself thrown. He caught himself at the last moment, steadied the horse, and then carefully dismounted and handed the reins to another cowboy who was watching from the side of the corral. Then he walked over to where Emmeline was standing, pulling off his hat and wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Miss Porter," he said, and there was surprise and pleasure in his voice. "This is unexpected." "I brought you lunch," Emmeline said, feeling suddenly foolish with her basket and her borrowed buggy. "I thought you might be hungry, and I wanted to thank you properly for everything you did." Samuel's smile was slow and warm, and it made something flutter in Emmeline's stomach. "You did not need to do that," he said, "but I am not going to refuse fresh food. The cooking out here is passable at best. Let me wash up, and we can eat over by the creek where it is cooler." They walked together to a spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods, where a small creek burbled over smooth stones, and the air was sweet with the scent of falling leaves. Emmeline spread out the food while Samuel washed his hands and face in the cold water, and then they sat together on the grass and ate in comfortable silence. "How are you doing?" Samuel finally asked, his blue eyes serious as they studied her face. "Are you all right?" "I am managing," Emmeline said honestly. "Mrs. Whitmore has been wonderful and the town has been very kind. I have enough work to keep me busy and I am saving money again. But it is hard, knowing what my brother did. Knowing that I spent 5 years taking care of him, and he repaid me by selling me like cattle." "He is a fool," Samuel said with quiet intensity. "And he does not deserve your grief or your loyalty. You are worth 100 of him, Emmeline." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her heart skip. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the genuine respect and admiration in his eyes. This man, who had given up everything to save her, who had asked for nothing in return, who was now working himself to exhaustion to rebuild what he had spent, this man saw her as valuable, as worthy, as someone worth sacrificing for. "Why did you really do it?" she asked softly. "And please do not tell me it was just because it was the right thing to do. Plenty of men in this town knew what Thomas did, and none of them rode after me except you." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Emmeline watched the play of emotions across his face. She saw the hesitation there, the uncertainty, but also the truth struggling to break free. "Because I have been in love with you since the first time I saw you," he finally said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "It was more than a year ago, and you were carrying a basket of laundry that was nearly bigger than you, struggling down the street in the summer heat. I offered to help you carry it, and you thanked me but said you could manage on your own. You had this fierce pride in your eyes, this determination to not need anyone's help, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Emmeline felt her breath catch in her throat, felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "I started finding excuses to come into town," Samuel continued, "just to see you, just to watch you go about your day. I told myself I was going to wait until I had enough saved to buy my own land, until I could offer you a real home and a real future. But then I heard what your brother had done, and I realized that all those plans, all that waiting, it did not matter if I lost you. So I spent everything I had, and I would do it again in a heartbeat, because you are worth more than land or money or anything else I could ever have." "Samuel," Emmeline whispered, and then she was moving, leaning toward him, closing the distance between them. She took his face in her hands and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that single gesture, gratitude and affection, and the beginning of something that felt like love. Samuel responded with gentle intensity, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was something worth cherishing, and Emmeline felt something inside her that had been broken start to heal. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "I have been wanting to do that for a very long time," he admitted. "Then why did you wait so long to come see me?" Emmeline asked, half teasing and half serious. "Because I did not want you to feel obligated," Samuel said. "I did not save you so that you would owe me anything, Emmeline. I wanted you to be free to make your own choices, to live your own life. If you had decided you never wanted to see me again, I would have accepted that and been grateful just knowing you were safe." "You are an idiot," Emmeline said, but her voice was full of affection. "A wonderful, honorable, infuriating idiot. I have been waiting for 3 weeks for you to come into town, wondering if I had imagined the way you looked at me, wondering if maybe you regretted spending so much money on someone who could not give you anything in return." "You did not imagine anything," Samuel assured her. "And you already gave me everything I wanted when you kissed me just now. Everything else is just details we can work out together." They spent the rest of the afternoon by that creek, talking about everything and nothing, learning about each other in the way that new lovers do. Samuel told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about losing his parents to a twister when he was 17 and heading west to find work. He told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, of building something lasting and real. Emmeline told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the journey to Colorado with her parents and Thomas, about the struggle to survive after the influenza took her mother and father. She told him about the loneliness of the last 5 years, the crushing weight of responsibility, the growing realization that Thomas was never going to be the man she had hoped he would become. As the sun started to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel walked Emmeline back to her buggy. He helped her up onto the seat, then stood there looking up at her with an expression that made her heart ache. "Can I come see you?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. Can I court you the way you deserve to be courted?" "Yes," Emmeline said, smiling down at him. "Yes, you can. In fact, I insist on it." "Then I will be in town on Sunday," Samuel promised. "I will take you to church and then maybe we can have lunch at the hotel restaurant. Something nice, to make up for all the times I wanted to ask you and did not have the courage." "I will be waiting," Emmeline said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The next 3 months were the happiest of Emmeline's life. Samuel came into town every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesday evenings when he could get away from the ranch. He courted her with old-fashioned propriety, bringing her flowers and small gifts, taking her on walks through the town and out into the countryside. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Emmeline found herself falling more deeply in love with him with each passing day. Samuel was everything Thomas had not been: honest, hardworking, reliable. He kept his promises, no matter how small. When he said he would be somewhere, he was there. When he said he would do something, he did it. And he treated Emmeline like she was something precious, something to be cherished and protected and valued. The town watched their courtship with approval and not a small amount of romantic interest. It was the kind of story that people loved: the cowboy who had given up everything to save the woman he loved, the woman who had survived betrayal and found happiness again. Mrs. Whitmore took particular pride in the match, as if she had arranged it herself, and several of the older women in town took to giving Emmeline knowing smiles and asking when she thought Samuel might propose. The proposal, when it came, was perfect in its simplicity. It was Christmas Eve, and Samuel had brought Emmeline to the same spot by the creek where they had shared their first kiss. The cottonwoods were bare now, their branches etched against a sky brilliant with stars, and the creek was mostly frozen over. Samuel had built a small fire to keep them warm, and they sat together on a blanket, watching the flames dance and listening to the quiet sounds of the winter night. "I have something for you," Samuel said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring. "It is not much," he said, his voice nervous. "I could not afford anything fancy, not with all the debt I am still paying off, but I wanted you to have something, wanted you to know that I am serious about this, about us." Emmeline took the box with trembling hands, looking at the ring through eyes that were already filling with tears. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a plain gold band that caught the firelight and glowed warm against the dark velvet of the box. "Emmeline Porter," Samuel said, taking her hands in his. "I know we have not been courting for very long, and I know I still have a lot of work ahead of me to rebuild what I spent. But I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my life, and I do not want to wait any longer to make you my wife. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Emmeline said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you. I have been waiting for you to ask since that day I brought you lunch at the ranch." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back during their proper courtship. And Emmeline kissed him back, feeling like all the broken pieces of her life were finally coming together into something beautiful and whole. They were married in February of 1884, in a small ceremony at the Manasseh Church, with half the town in attendance. Emmeline wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace borrowed from Mrs. Whitmore and flowers that Samuel had somehow managed to find, despite the winter cold. Samuel wore his best suit, which was still worn at the elbows and shiny at the knees, but Emmeline thought he looked more handsome than any man had a right to look. Mrs. Whitmore cried through the entire ceremony, and several other women joined her. The men of the Double Z Ranch showed up in their Sunday best, grinning and slapping Samuel on the back and congratulating him on landing such a fine woman. Even the minister, a stern man not given to displays of emotion, seemed moved by the obvious love between the bride and groom. After the wedding, there was a reception at the hotel with food and music and dancing. Samuel held Emmeline close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, and she rested her head against his chest and thought about how far she had come from that terrible morning when Thomas had sold her. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything and how Samuel had given up everything to save her. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel murmured against her hair. I am thinking about how lucky I am, Emmeline said honestly, and how much I love you. I am the lucky one, Samuel countered. I got to marry the woman of my dreams, and all it cost me was 3 years of savings. That is not funny, Emmeline said, but she was smiling. It is a little funny, Samuel insisted, and it was worth every penny. I would do it again tomorrow if I had to. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Manassas, in a room that Mrs. Whitmore had insisted on paying for as her wedding gift to them. It was the first time Emmeline had ever stayed in a hotel, and she was charmed by the clean sheets and the real mattress and the privacy of having a door that locked. Samuel was gentle and patient with her, and if there was any awkwardness to their first night together, it was quickly overcome by love and trust and genuine affection. The next morning, they loaded Emmeline's few possessions into a wagon and headed out to the Double Z Ranch, where Samuel had arranged to rent a small cabin on the property. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, with a wood stove and a few pieces of basic furniture, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Emmeline threw herself into making the cabin into a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, braided rugs for the floors, and planted a garden in the small plot of land behind the house. Samuel worked long hours at the ranch, but he always came home in the evenings with a smile on his face and love in his eyes. They ate dinner together by lamplight, talking about their days, making plans for their future. And at night, they fell into bed together, learning each other's bodies, building a physical intimacy that matched the emotional connection they already shared. Life was not easy. Samuel was still paying off the debt he had incurred to save Emmeline, and money was tight. They ate simply, wore their clothes until they were more patched than original fabric, and saved every penny they could. But they were happy, genuinely happy, in a way that neither of them had ever been before. Spring came to the San Luis Valley with a rush of green growth and wildflowers that turned the meadows into riots of color. Emmeline discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Samuel's face when she told him was something she would remember for the rest of her life. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time, and then he set her down gently and kissed her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents. You are going to be a mother. And you are going to be a father," Emmeline replied, smiling through her own tears. "A wonderful father. Our child is so lucky to have you." Samuel became even more protective after that, insisting that Emmeline not work too hard, that she rest when she was tired, that she eat the best of whatever food they had. He took on extra jobs to save money for the baby, working himself to exhaustion, but always coming home with a smile and a gentle hand on Emmeline's growing belly. In late summer, word came through the town that Thomas Porter had been found dead in a mining camp near Leadville, killed in a knife fight over a card game. Emmeline heard the news with mixed emotions: grief for the brother she had once loved, anger at the waste of his life, and a strange sense of closure that allowed her to finally let go of the past. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked, holding her close in the quiet of their cabin. "I am sad," Emmeline admitted. "Not for the man he became, but for the boy he used to be, for the brother I thought I had, but mostly I feel free. Free from the obligation to forgive him, free from the guilt of not being able to save him. He made his choices and they led him to a bad end, but that is not my burden to carry anymore." "No, it is not," Samuel agreed. "You have your own life now, your own family, and we are going to be all right, Emmeline. I promise you that." Their son was born in December of 1884, on a cold night when the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Samuel paced outside the cabin while Mrs. Whitmore and the midwife helped with the delivery, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst through the door with his heart in his throat. Emmeline was exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at Samuel with tears streaming down her face and smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Samuel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and blue eyes that would probably change color, and the most perfect little fingers Samuel had ever seen. He reached out and let one of those fingers wrap around his thumb, and felt something in his chest expand until he thought he might explode with it. "What should we name him?" Emmeline asked. Samuel thought for a moment, then smiled. "How about James, after your father?" Emmeline's eyes filled with fresh tears. "That is perfect," she whispered. "James Zinc, our little miracle." The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. James grew into a bright, energetic toddler who kept his parents busy and laughing. Samuel finally paid off the last of his debts, and he and Emmeline began saving in earnest for the land they both dreamed of owning. They worked side by side, supporting each other through bad winters and dry summers, through illnesses and setbacks, and the thousand small challenges of building a life together. In 1887, Samuel was offered a job as foreman at the Double Z Ranch, with a substantial increase in wages. He and Emmeline celebrated by buying a real bed frame to replace the ropes and boards they had been using, and Emmeline cried with happiness over the luxury of it. They were moving up in the world, slowly but surely, and their future was starting to look brighter than either of them had dared to hope. That same year, Emmeline discovered she was pregnant again, and this time it was twins, a boy and a girl, born in the spring of 1888. They named them Robert and Rose, and suddenly their small cabin felt very cramped indeed. Samuel immediately began making plans to build an addition, working in every spare moment to add 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. But the best news came in the fall of 1889, when the owner of the Double Z Ranch decided to sell off some of his land to raise capital for expansion. Samuel had been saving for years, and with the bonus he received for his excellent work as foreman, he finally had enough to buy 160 acres of prime grazing land along the creek where he and Emmeline had shared their first kiss. The day they signed the papers, Samuel and Emmeline stood on their new land with their 3 children, looking out at the mountains and the valley and the endless Colorado sky. James was 4 years old, running through the grass with all the energy of youth. Robert and Rose were toddling around, exploring everything with chubby hands and curious eyes, and Samuel and Emmeline stood with their arms around each other, marveling at how far they had come. "We did it," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it. We own land, Emmeline. Real land with water rights and grazing rights and everything. This is ours." "No," Emmeline corrected gently, smiling up at her husband. "This is ours because of you. Because you worked yourself to exhaustion for 5 years, because you never gave up on our dream, because you are the best man I have ever known." "I only worked hard because I had something worth working for," Samuel replied. "You and our children are everything to me, Emmeline. This land, this future we are building, it is all for you." They kissed then, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of hope and promise and enduring love. And their children played around them, laughing in the autumn sunshine, as the cottonwood trees turned gold and the creek sang its eternal song over the stones. Over the next several years, Samuel and Emmeline built their ranch from the ground up. They started with a small herd of cattle, adding to it slowly as they could afford it. Samuel proved to have a gift for ranching, and his reputation for honesty and quality stock spread throughout the valley. Emmeline managed the household with the same efficiency she had brought to everything else in her life, and she also started taking in sewing work again, making clothes for the growing number of families settling in the area. Their children grew strong and healthy, educated at the small schoolhouse in Manassas and at home by their mother, who was determined that they would have opportunities she had never had. James showed an early aptitude for working with horses, just like his father. Robert was quiet and thoughtful, always asking questions about how things worked. And Rose was fierce and independent, with her mother's determination and her father's stubborn refusal to give up. In 1892, Emmeline gave birth to another daughter, Anna, and 2 years later, a son they named William. Their original cabin had been expanded and rebuilt so many times that it barely resembled the small 2-room structure they had started with. Now it was a proper house, with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen and a parlor where the family gathered in the evenings. Samuel's dream of owning a successful ranch had come true through years of backbreaking work and careful management. By 1895, the Zinc Ranch was known throughout the San Luis Valley as one of the best operations in the region. Samuel employed several cowboys now, men who respected him and were loyal to him because he treated them fairly and paid them well. But despite their success, Samuel and Emmeline never forgot where they had started. They were generous to those who were struggling, often hiring men who needed work and paying them more than they strictly had to. Emmeline was known for her charity, always willing to help a neighbor in need, always ready with a basket of food or a word of encouragement. And they made sure their children understood the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. One evening in the summer of 1896, Samuel and Emmeline sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were scattered around the property, James working with the horses in the corral, Robert and Rose helping with the evening chores, Anna and William playing in the yard. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that came at the end of a good day, and Samuel reached over to take Emmeline's hand. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The day I found you in Carmody's camp." "Sometimes," Emmeline admitted. "But mostly I think about everything that has happened since, about how close I came to losing everything and how you saved me. Not just from Carmody, but from giving up on myself. You gave me back my life, Samuel, and then you gave me a life better than anything I could have imagined." "We built this together," Samuel said. "I may have bought you back, but everything after that, the ranch, the children, this life we have, that is because of both of us working together. I could not have done any of this without you, Emmeline." "And I would not have wanted to do it with anyone else," Emmeline replied. She squeezed his hand and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Samuel Zinc. I have loved you from that first day, when you rode into that camp and refused to leave without me, and I will love you until the day I die." "That is good," Samuel said, smiling, "because I plan on keeping you around for a very long time. We have at least another 50 years ahead of us, and I intend to spend every single one of them with you by my side." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, watching their children, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. And Emmeline thought about the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment, the betrayal and the terror, the unexpected rescue, the slow building of trust and love. She thought about how a single act of courage and kindness had changed everything, had given her not just her freedom but a future worth living. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations, of hard work and simple joys. Their children grew up and started families of their own, though most of them stayed in the valley, close to their parents. James married a rancher's daughter and started his own operation on land that bordered his father's. Robert became a teacher at the school in Manassas, marrying a quiet woman who shared his love of books and learning. Rose shocked everyone by becoming a veterinarian, traveling to Denver for training and then returning to the valley to practice. Anna married a banker and moved to Alamosa, though she visited often. And William took over the day-to-day operations of the Zinc Ranch, working side by side with his father. Samuel and Emmeline grew older together, their hair turning silver, their faces weathering with age and sun and laughter. But the love between them never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect, and the simple pleasure of waking up next to each other every morning. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Emmeline back to the creek where he had proposed, where they had shared their first kiss, where their ranch now stood as testament to everything they had built together. It was February, and snow lay thick on the ground, but the spot was as beautiful as ever. "Do you remember what I said to you on our wedding night?" Samuel asked, holding both of Emmeline's hands in his. "You said a lot of things that night," Emmeline replied with a teasing smile. "I said that spending 3 years of savings to buy you back was worth every penny," Samuel reminded her. "And I want you to know that I still feel that way. I would do it all again without hesitation, because you are the best thing that ever happened to me. These 20 years with you have been worth more than all the gold in Colorado. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Emmeline said, tears in her eyes. "You saved my life, Samuel, in every way a person can be saved. And then you loved me and built a life with me and gave me a family and a home and a future. I could not ask for anything more." They kissed then, a kiss that held 20 years of love and passion and partnership. And when they finally pulled apart, they stood together looking out at the land they had claimed, the legacy they were building for their children and grandchildren. By the time Samuel and Emmeline reached their golden years, the Zinc Ranch was one of the most prosperous operations in the San Luis Valley. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and personal losses, but they had done it together, supporting each other through every challenge. Their children had all succeeded in their own ways, and their grandchildren were growing up with the same values of hard work and integrity that Samuel and Emmeline had instilled in their own children. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, Samuel and Emmeline sat together on the porch of their house, now expanded yet again to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. They were in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their spirits were still strong. Around them, their family had gathered for a celebration, 3 generations of Zincs, all together, all thriving. "We did all right, did we not?" Samuel said, watching his grandchildren play in the yard where his own children had played decades before. "We did better than all right," Emmeline replied. "We built something that will last, Samuel, not just this ranch, but a family, a legacy. Our great-grandchildren will know our names, will know our story, will know what we built here starting from nothing." "Starting from $600 and a dream," Samuel corrected with a smile. "Starting from love," Emmeline said firmly. "That is what saved me. That is what built this ranch. That is what kept us going through everything. Your love and mine and the love we have for our family. That is our real legacy." Samuel pulled Emmeline close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, the way she had done thousands of times over the past 26 years. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, listening to the laughter of their family, feeling the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Emmeline thought back one more time to that terrible morning when her brother had sold her, to the dark days that followed, to the moment when a cowboy named Samuel Zinc had ridden into her life and changed everything. She thought about how close she had come to losing hope and how love had saved her in the end. She squeezed Samuel's hand, feeling the familiar roughness of his palm, the strength that had never wavered in all their years together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Samuel asked, though she knew he understood. "For finding me," Emmeline said simply. "For saving me, for loving me, for giving me this life, this family, this beautiful, impossible dream that somehow came true." "The pleasure has been all mine," Samuel replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Emmeline, and I would do it all again, 1,000 times over, just to end up right here, right now, with you by my side." They kissed one more time as their family laughed and celebrated around them, as the mountains stood eternal watch over the valley, as the creek sang its endless song. And in that moment, everything was perfect, everything was right, everything was exactly as it should be. Samuel and Emmeline Zinc lived many more years together, growing old with grace and dignity, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built. When Samuel finally passed away in 1924 at the age of 67, Emmeline held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. And when she followed him 3 years later, her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed and heard her final words, "Tell your father I am coming home." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Zinc Ranch, beneath cottonwood trees that whispered in the wind. Their gravestone was simple, bearing only their names and the dates of their lives, but it needed no elaborate epitaph. Their story was written in the land they had claimed, in the children they had raised, in the love that had sustained them through everything. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the San Luis Valley, and the stars come out one by one, you can still hear the creek singing over the stones, carrying with it the echo of a love that began with sacrifice and grew into something eternal. A love that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best things in life are worth giving up everything for, and that true happiness is built not on money or land or status, but on the simple, profound choice to love another person with your whole heart, no matter what the cost. The Zinc Ranch still stands today, operated by the great-great-grandchildren of Samuel and Emmeline, a testament to what two people can build when they refuse to give up on each other or their dreams. And somewhere in the family archives, preserved with care, is a simple gold ring and a faded photograph of a cowboy and his bride, standing together on their wedding day with hope in their eyes and love in their hearts, ready to face whatever the future might bring together.